Hello and welcome to part 4 of our Purposeful Global Engagement series at Jessup University's Center for Global Engagement. This series helps orient individuals and teams for effective cross-cultural participation. Again, my name is Dr. Daniel Gluck, and I'm a professor here at Jessup University as well as the director of our Global Center. In this video, we'll cover the important topic of peacemaking and bridge building. Let's dive in. Here's a few of the key themes that we're going to cover in this video. What is peacemaking and why is it important? We're going to find out that the Bible actually talks quite a bit about peacemaking in this little video. What about conflict? Doesn't conflict happen all the time? And if we want to be peacemakers, how do we deal with that? And then thirdly, how do we build cultural bridges when we're trying to be effective in cross-cultural engagement? You might recall from our first video that God wants to reconcile us with both Himself and with others. And in this video, we want to suggest that being an agent of reconciliation involves being a peacemaker and a bridge builder. So let's break this down a little bit. I want to start with a brief story about a wonderful little Kenyan man that I had the opportunity of meeting named Bishop Cornelius Korir. I stumbled into his church during the time when I was doing doctoral research in Kenya, and I had chai with him, Kenyan chai. I sat in his little office and heard him telling stories. And I found out after the fact, I knew he was kind of a big deal. He happened to be the Archbishop of Western Kenya, the Catholic diocese in Western Kenya. But I found out almost a decade later when he passed away that he was kind of like a superstar in Kenya. When he passed away, all the news agencies were running stories of his death and his work. And his work was very unique because he was known as a peacemaker in Kenya. In fact, he had worked particularly with these two ethnic groups called the Pokot and the Marakwet in northern Kenya. These guys had historically fought back and forth with one another over their cattle grazing land. So imagine these nomadic peoples moving around, grazing their cattle, trying to find grass and stuff like that. But then somebody else comes into my grazing land and I don't want them there, and we start fighting and we start killing each other's cattle. And it led to actually cattle raids that involved ambushes and human loss of life and all kinds of really bad stuff in northern Kenya. Little Bishop Korir, he was a relatively short, slight man, very soft-spoken. He had the courage to go into those communities and to try to create spaces for dialogue and peacemaking. And I want to tell you a little bit about how he did that. First of all, he extended a hand of mercy to these people. You're probably not surprised that in a rural northern Kenya setting, there was a lot of poverty, there was a lot of need for food and clothes and medical care and all that. And he started his ministry to the Pokot and the Marakwet by bringing food assistance and giving generosity to these people groups. But then when the conflict started arising, he came in and he asked really good questions and he listened and he served as a third party who could help them find common ground between one another. And one of the most famous stories, which I had the opportunity to research a little bit, he realized that between the Pokot and the Marakwet in this one community, there was a big river separating the two people groups. And actually, both sides had a desire to build a bridge, a physical bridge, and probably a metaphorical bridge, to join their communities together so that they could trade commerce and they could buy and sell and move back and forth across the river. And he realized, because of his wisdom and peacemaking, that if he could get them both bought in to a joint project, a common goal to build this physical bridge, that it would also be an emotional and spiritual bridge for their two cultures. And sure enough, they began swinging hammers with one another and putting up this bridge, and all of a sudden all this new camaraderie and peacemaking and reconciliation started happening between the tribes. In fact, they even started intermarrying with one another, which is a big sign in sub-Saharan Africa that there's been reconciliation, that there's camaraderie, right? That's pretty incredible. I love the story of career. What does the Bible say about peacemakers? Here's a few verses I want to highlight. Matthew 5:9 says, "Blessed are the peacemakers." This is Jesus' famous Sermon on the Mount, right? "For they will be called the children of God." Wow, that's pretty intense, right? Blessed are the peacemakers. They will be God's children. Romans 12 says, "Don't repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. And if it is possible, as far as it depends on you and I, live at peace with everyone." Okay? James 3, "Peacemakers who sow in peace will reap a harvest of righteousness." When we sow in peace, when we act as peacemakers and find common ground, righteousness will be the result. I think those are some pretty important passages to think about. Have you noticed the kind of words we use when we talk about conflict? Kind of the elephant in the room is, even if you and I want to be peacemakers, there's conflict all around us, right? Have you noticed the terms we use? Conflict prevention. We just need to prevent it so it doesn't happen. Conflict management. Let's just manage our conflict and keep it at a dull roar so that it doesn't cause problems. Conflict resolution. As soon as we can get rid of it and resolve it, then we won't have to deal with conflict anymore, right? One very thoughtful scholar came along. His name is John Letterock, and he came up with a new term called conflict transformation. His thesis is that because conflict is inevitable, when addressed rightly, it might be the greatest opportunity for transformation of a relationship. And I think that has a lot to do with you and I being peacemakers as a part of the mission of God, right? If we will experience conflict, but if we know how to deal with conflict in a right way, we might be able to be agents of reconciliation to actually transform relationships that have been in conflict with one another. I love the simple teaching of the prophet Micah in Micah chapter 6, verse 8. I think you're probably familiar with it. "He has shown you, O man or woman, what is good and what the Lord requires of you, to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God." It almost seems too simple, right? Justice, mercy, humility. Cool. The societal injustices faced by Micah and the Israelites he was speaking to are uncannily like some of the things that we face today. He documents things like property theft, inhumane treatment of others, selective interpretation of God's principles for my own personal financial gain. I'm sure that's not happening around you, right? Claims by perpetrators of injustice that they are blessed by God. Hashtag bless people, right? And he says, no, he has shown you what is the right thing to do. You need to do justly, you need to love mercy, and you need to walk humbly. I want to camp on this for just a little bit. When we think about justice biblically, there's kind of two key words in the Old Testament that lend some understanding to us in terms of trying to process this idea of justice. The first word is called tzedakah in Hebrew, and it means, it's the word we get righteousness from. It means doing what's right in the first place, rightness, right? But there's a second word called mishpat. It means responding to what's wrong or bringing equity or fairness into things that are unequitable or unfair. So justice kind of has a twofold meaning here in Micah. It means, first of all, we need to do what's right in the first place. And secondly, we need to respond to injustice, right? So we as peacemakers are not only people who are supposed to live rightly, but also who are supposed to speak up when we see injustices, as we've noted in some of our other videos in this series. Secondly, mercy. Mercy is simply the ability to put yourself in another person's shoes. That's what I think Bishop Korir did when he went up into northern Kenya and started to have listening conversations and started to engage dialogue to help people imagine what it might be like to be on the other side. Mercy is also the ability, ideally, to be able to offer forgiveness to your perpetrators. When people do you wrong, that you could offer them radical forgiveness, radical mercy. But many times, I think one of the biggest challenges of Christian community is we like to land on one side of the camp or the other, justice or mercy. Some of us like to say, we're just going to preach the truth and we're going to say it hard and you got to deal with it because the Bible says so. Arr, right? The other camp is the side that says, live and let live. Your truth is your truth. My truth is my truth. Let's just offer mercy to everyone. But I think the Bible is clear in saying, no, it's not either or. Again, it's both and. Justice and mercy must embrace in order for us to understand this idea of reconciliation and peacemaking. I want to propose in this video that it's actually the posture of humility, the third posture that Micah suggests, that helps us know how to moderate between justice and mercy. When do we need tough love? When do we need forgiveness? When do we need punishment or consequence of sin? When do we need to let somebody off the hook because they've already experienced enough pain from the harm that they've caused or whatnot? So this idea of conflict transformation, I'll just briefly highlight it, and I want to give you some practical tools for being a peacemaker and a bridge builder when you go into cross-cultural situations. Conflict transformation kind of echoes the idea from Micah 6:8, and it has four components: truth, mercy, justice, and peace. So John Letterock, the scholar who came up with this term, conflict transformation, he says, truth, we need to have an accurate account of injustice or conflict in order for there to be reconciliation. Sometimes that means tearing the scab off so that we can get down to the wound and put the balm on it and actually bring healing. And that could be very difficult, right? We need mercy. We need to be able to put ourselves in another person's shoes. We need justice. Mercy doesn't mean we have to get rid of justice. There are still consequences for sin. There's consequences for broken relationship. When we go against one another, when we betray one another, when we lie, cheat, steal, whatever, right? There is justice. And then peace finally comes when we can see each other as human and commit to common goals moving forward. So how can we do this practically? Let me close with this and a question. How to be a bridge builder. Number one, I think the greatest leaders and the greatest peacemakers are people who ask really good questions and spend more time listening than talking. You need to be a good listener to be a peacemaker. Secondly, maintain a posture of learning. You're going to see this theme throughout our video series, that when we engage in cross-cultural situations, we want to be learners, not people who are coming in with the answer to everything or trying to tell everybody what to do, but rather to have a posture of learning. Third, we need to address injustice. We've already talked about the verse from Proverbs where it says, speak up for those who can't speak for themselves or who have not been given a voice. And God calls us to be in His mission to be people of justice who speak up for the poor and the marginalized and those who don't have a voice. Fourthly, looking for common ground, focusing on finding common goals that we can move forward with a common mission. And then lastly, committing to those shared goals and moving forward. A final question for your consideration as we think about being peacemakers and bridge builders. What forms of injustice are damaging right relationships in your sphere? And how might you and I be called to serve as peacemakers? Thanks for watching.